Hello, everybody. I'm Nancy Margolis from the Nancy Margolis Gallery. And I want to thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful sunny day for me in New York. I don't know where the rest of you are, to have this conversation with Gail and Julie. I want to introduce first Gail Spaien and Julie Poitras Santos, who will have a conversation in a little bit about Gail's work. First, I want to give you some highlights about each of the artists. Gail Spaien lives and works in Portland, Maine. She received her BFA at the University of Southern Maine and MFA from San Francisco Art Institute. Spaien is the recipient of numerous fellowships and grants, including the Lillian Orlowski and William Freed Foundation, the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation Artist Advancement Grant, and the Maine Arts Commission. She has exhibited extensively at galleries and museums throughout the US and internationally, including the Algonquin Museum of American Art, the Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum, and the Portland Museum of Art. Gail, in addition to working as a painter, is a professor in the MFA program at the Maine College of Art. And this is her first solo show with the Nancy Margolis Gallery, and we're so pleased to have her a part of the gallery. Julie Poitras Santos is today's moderator. She is an artist, curator, and writer. She received 2 MFAs, one in sculpture and ceramics from the University of Colorado in Boulder, and one in poetry from the University of Southern Maine. Her poems and essays have been widely published, including an eloquent essay printed in the exhibition catalog. Her site-specific artwork has been exhibited in the US and internationally. Poitras Santos is the Director of Exhibitions at the Institute of Contemporary Art at the Maine College of Art. Before we start the gallery talk, Lillian Thorpe, who is the Associate Director of the gallery, will explain how the talk is formatted, and then she will show each of the 10 paintings in the exhibition. The conversation with the artists will then begin. So I'm handing it over to Lillian.
Okay. Hello, I am Lillian Thorpe, the Associate Director of Nancy Margolis Gallery. Before I hand it over to Gail and Julie, I just want to say a few words about the format of the talk. After the discussion, there will be an opportunity to ask questions or make comments. And there are 2 ways to ask a question. You can either type your question in the chat box and I can read it aloud, or you can click the raise hand icon and then I will call on you and unmute you and you can ask your question. I will now lastly show you each of the 10 paintings in Gail's exhibition, Still Life with Water, which will be referenced in today's conversation. Okay, I would now like to hand it over to Julie and to Gail.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Maybe a little thumbs up. Great, thanks. Thank you so much to Nancy Margolis and to Lillian Thorpe for hosting us and inviting us today for this conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. And thanks to everyone here on the Zoom. It was a sold out event, which we're really excited about. And I was excited to see some familiar names on the list and some folks I don't know. So welcome everyone, and thanks for being here. And I'm delighted to have this conversation with Gail. As many of you know, Gail and I have worked together for quite some time, many years. And but I think it's rare that you have time in your work life to really sit down and have a deep conversation about the work. So I'm really looking forward to it. So shall we dive in, Gail?
Yes, let's dive in.
Okay, great. So I thought in light of that connection and how we know each other, before everyone came on today, we were talking about how this feels like, you know, our familiarity with teaching, since we know each other through that lens in a lot of ways. I thought I'd start with a question that I think you often ask students, but I know you also ask yourself in a sense of kind of deep probing into the reasons why you paint. And so really the question is, why painting? Why now? Why this craft has you know, taken you, and really why you've dedicated yourself to it.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Hi, everybody. I'm going to say thank you again for coming. I'm kind of humbled, right? It's very cool that you're all here from a lot of places in my life. So thanks for taking the time. So why painting? I'm going to kind of, I could start with saying because it's a metaphysical act, but I'm going to reverse that. And I'm going to start with the idea that I don't mind being alone. The solitude of the painter was difficult as a young person. But as I've gotten older, it's an act that supports solitude, and it's a way to think and a place to put my mind. So on like the ground floor, right? I don't mind being alone. It's a way to create a space to enter and to make sense out of my experience, right? Also, on the ground floor, I think I might have been a boat builder or a house builder at some point. And I grew up in a situation where my relatives there were a lot of construction people in my background. So I saw a lot of building going on. I don't like a lot of tools. I like the directness of painting. Like I don't want to have a lot of stuff between my hands and the thing. And so, but in the painting, I build, and in the work that you see in this show, I literally think about, oh, the windowsill is made like this, or the chair is made like this, or, you know, one piece of wood would sit on top of the other piece of wood, or that the way that the boards in the room go are vertical or horizontal. So it gives me an opportunity to almost do another activity within the activity of painting. I like to watch an image materialize. I grew up, my dad had a dark room. I think I never really understood photography that much, but I spent a lot of time with him as a kid watching an image come up in the developing trays. So I think of it a lot like that. I think of the image, I like to see an image materialize. It's a process that I trust. I could probably spend the whole time talking about this, right? It's a process that I trust a lot. And oftentimes I say, if I could live my life like I make my paintings, I'd be okay, right? Like I can get into a big mess in my paintings, and I'm okay with that. In my life, not so much. I also know that the process is such that it's fresh and new to start, and then it can get muddled, and sometimes things need to be erased out, and it's very rare that I get it right the first time. So it's a process that I trust quite a bit. I'm a very visual person, and so it's a way to organize a space and organize my world. My house tends to be organized as such. I will often, if I don't like what I'm seeing in a space, I'll put my hand up, to kind of block it out. So it's a way for me to control my view. And then more on the, maybe the bigger picture or the more metaphysical picture. A painting, I think of a painting as a noun and a verb. My colleagues that I work with, Philip Brew and Honor Mac, we talk about this often with students. Painting is a noun and it's a verb. It's a thing and it's an activity. And the idea that the object transmits energy from one person to another person, like when you go to a museum and you look at an object, there's a transmission of energy that takes place across time, right? From the beginning of time to now, that I really am engaged with. And I look at I go to a museum and I see an Ellsworth Kelly painting, which is a colored shape on a wall, and it makes me feel something. And that question is compelling for me. Why do objects hold that transmission? And how do you make an object that holds that transmission? So I think of it as a metaphysical act in that sense, right? It's energy. And also it's tactile. It's a physical act. So I think it's a way to translate sensation. Probably more of this answer will come out in the subsequent questions.
That's great. Thanks, Gail. That's a lot. What's really struck me was the lead into thinking about aloneness and how the practice can cultivate a space for that kind of reflection and a workspace. And I was thinking about the writer Haruki Murakami talks about going into the studio. He's writing, going into the writing studio and closing the door. And he really talks about kind of that moment of transition, that kind of threshold space of moving into this space where he enters another world. And what I think is really interesting in your work is that you enter that other room. And I might even interject in my line of thought here to say, when I came and looked at your work in September and really had kind of a deep time with it alone, because it was the pandemic and we were social distancing, that I walked into this room and not only were the paintings windows open, but the window was open and it was very open to the world. And so I think there's something about that aloneness from which you open the window onto the world. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. I mean, I think in a way you're painting from life. You're looking at the world out the window and you're sharing that with us. And I wonder if you would talk a little bit about that relationship between kind of going into the space of aloneness and then looking outward.
Sure. So the idea that the painting is a window, right? I'll start from the ground floor and work up to the metaphysical. The idea that the painting is a window that you gaze out of, the act of gazing out, speaks to, is a respite of sorts, right? We go at the end of the day or on a vacation. It's the thing that we look forward to, right? That moment to sit and look out and do nothing, which actually is doing a lot. And, if we have to talk about COVID at this point, because there's been a lot of that going on, right? There's been a lot of gazing out, doing nothing. And the idea that doing nothing is doing something is both a political and also a spiritual idea, right? So, and one does that by themselves. So the act of gazing out underscores this sense of both a suspension of time and also like an urgency, but a slowness at the same time. I'm gonna back up even more. So I became an artist, like in 11th grade, I decided I wanted to be artist. And I think because I thought it was cool, right? I was cool. And like I had my best friend's brother had a dog and he played music. And I just thought that's kind of what I want to be like. But I also knew that being an artist would be a thing I could do and that I could be alone without anybody asking me or questioning that. So I just want to say that it's come out of that place. And I also think that, on the more metaphysical side, the spiritual part of painting practice is that like the Gauguin, like who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? Kind of contemplation. So that, I'm losing my train of thought. So the idea that, I've lost my train of thought about that. So back to the gazing out, this idea of suspension and contemplation, the finite and the intimate, and the spiritual part, that time is both slow and fast and deep and shallow. It is all part of that. I'm not sure that I'm asking a question, and maybe I'm rambling a little bit. I will talk about the horizon line out those windows.
Yeah, I actually, that's wonderful, because I was thinking about this notion of landscape. You're sort of looking out these windows, but at the same time, you're really looking out on these horizon lines and these incredible spaces. So please, yeah.
So the horizon line has this tension between now and forever, right? And I say in one of the quotes in the thing, it's like grounded, it's groundless and anchored at the same time. It's how we know where we are. I have sailed in the middle of the ocean with no sight of land, and you feel like you're really on another planet. I mean, you do. It's like, for those of you out there that have done that, it's and especially at night, it's very crazy. You like the space, your relation to space is very different. So the horizon line is the place that you know that you're somewhere. And the ocean horizon line in particular is a space that, it's safe and it's not safe. It's a discovery, and there's unexpected things going on. I am conscious often that we are on a planet hurtling through space. And that horizon line is what makes me know that. And so in the work, back to like what the work looks like, I try to embed the work with that sensation of gravity and light and space. And so those open windows, and also weather and air movement. That space is, it's a space of contemplation, and it's a sublime space. It's one that it's the main question in my studio practice, is how to describe that.
That's fantastic. I think, I'm going to say 5, 6, 7 years ago, you had work on exhibit in the ICA at Mecca. And I remember very clearly you talking about being grounded, being in your boots, I think you even said. And then we looked at the work, and all the work was floating. And there's this real transition that your work has made that really reflects on both of those spaces. I feel like the work really has this grounded quality within the rooms. And then we look out and see this horizon, which is floating because it's the sea, that we see, that we look out onto it. So I really see that, and I did pull out that quote of yours, that the edge between sky and water is a space that is both anchoring and groundless. And it really makes me think of all your time on, as you're saying, all your time on boats, but all your time also in cultivating a kind of interior space which is very prevalent in the work, you know, now that you really have this sense of expanding out to the room. So I was curious now, a couple of years ago, you worked pretty closely and were in an exhibition called American Genre that was curated by Michelle Grabner. And I'm really curious to hear your thinking about your relationship to genre. There's, of course, an interest and an engagement with landscape. And there's also a real history in your practice of working with still lifes. And so there's this way in which you're crossing a number of genres. And I wonder where you might locate yourself with regards to a conversation of genre now, a few years later from that exhibition.
Thanks. So when my mom painted, I watched her paint. I watched her make elaborate collages and do crewel work, and she was a maker. And I watched her take her paint box and go a few doors down to Bertha Schulman's house, where she and a bunch of other neighbors took a painting lesson from this teacher. And I think it was all women. I don't remember any men there, except the teacher was a man. And so the idea, so I grew up with seeing her still life paintings in my house. And I also grew up with the idea that that art is embedded in the domestic world. You know, I said my dad had a dark room. He also did building. And so I grew up seeing still life paintings. I grew up in a situation where arrangements in the home were very important. Also, the objects that were collected were very important. Both my parents they loved to go look for the right thing. And so in terms of genre, and in terms of the still life genre, that for me relates to the domestic, very much so, and how we order our world, and also the symbols that are present. I'm very interested in place, right? So the symbols that I use are cataloging what I see around me. Genre is a way of recording information, to telegraph it to other people in other times, in other places. And I see myself as such, like the cave painters did that, right? They gave information about where the bison was. I kind of, in a way, see myself as part of that lineage. And through genre, I had a very short stint with doing the figure, and it just never interested me that much. Lillian, or the Nancy Margolis catalog, wrote about the absence of the figure, but you feel the presence of the figure. Really, it's the information genre gives about time and place that interests me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned arrangements within the domestic, and I was thinking about when I was looking at your work, I spent some time writing about the geometries present in the work and the way in which the space is constructed. And I also think cultivated, there is a sense of a cultivation of the space, a sort of slow evolving quality to the paintings. But in particular, I'm really interested in thinking about the symmetry that I see in your work that is present and then often upended. And if you see that playing a role as a kind of character within the work, given the work doesn't have figures, how the geometries that you're choosing, which are at times often quite elaborate, sometimes impossible in a way, if I were to try to construct or build the room, how they're operating for you to communicate through that interface of painting.
Thanks for asking that, because it's important, because really it's all about the geometry. Like, I'm much more interested in the geometry of the image than I am in what the image is in many ways. So a number of things. I can't draw that well. So the things I pick to draw and put in the work. I'm challenging myself more at this time to see if I can draw more things. But the activity of trying to figure out, like, I don't understand perspective or how to do it, even though I've taught it, I understand just enough, like, that I can talk about it. And I understand it's about point of view and where things are located. And I like the idea of thinking about how the geometry creates that. The other thing I love is the tension between flatness and roundness, and like what is flat and what is round, and how that causes this kind of optical tension. And along with along with symmetry, right? Symmetry is very formal, and enables one to have some sort of stability. So that kind of weird perspective thing that I work with offsets the symmetry a little bit for me, but in the weird sort of flat and voluminous activity that I try to make in the geometry, it has to be right. Like, I have to get it right. I spend a lot of time moving things in my painting, a lot of time. If you all saw what I do, you actually wouldn't believe it. I erase huge swaths of the painting. And I suppose maybe in the future, when they take the X-ray machine to one of the paintings, they're going to see all the stuff underneath and where I moved things. Because 1/8 of an inch for me is crazy. A 16th makes me crazy. So in a way, Hillary Irons curated that show, The Perfection Show. Part of the discomfort in the work, because there is discomfort in the perfectionist tendency with the geometry, has a lot to do with that pattern geometry. Is it right? Is it not right? And so that causes, that's a lot related to, that you can't have utopia, right? You don't even want it, right? You don't want the perfection. And the last thing I guess I'll say about the geometry and the optical tension, right? Because the opticality is what I'm after. It causes you to have to look. That's what makes you want to gaze out, right? So that the geometry is what makes you want to keep looking. And so I have this constant game that I play. It's not quite Where's Waldo, but it is kind of, it's like, how much can I put in here for me without having it be too much, but also so that the viewer, the energy that I'm transmitting to the viewer, causes the viewer to sit and look a long time. And that is exactly it. It's the geometry and the flatness and the roundness, that part of what does that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there is a way, I mean, for those on the call who haven't looked long at Gail's work or haven't seen it in person, there is a way in which my eye moves between the space of the room, let's say, and the space of the window. And in the space of the room, there are often many things that are very patterned. And what's extraordinary to me is in that movement between kind of interiority and exteriority, looking in and looking out, is that I also see within the interior spaces these representations of the exterior, which I just want to sort of, I mean, I'm sure maybe you have something to add to this, but what I see is, for example, the new one with the screensaver, of course, is really fantastic. There is a river or outside, but it's on the screensaver. So that's another portal into the exterior world, but also the depictions of nature on vases, the cultivation of a kind of, still life bouquet of flowers. And there's this way in which, when I'm looking, those relationships of those patterns between inside and outside are bridged for me. So I move between the outside and the inside quite a bit. And I do have a question, actually. You can take what you want from that last segment, but also a question about sort of the use of these bonsai images, the bonsai trees inside the spaces, inside the rooms. Many of your works are titled bonsai, so I'd love to hear you talk about how that craft of bringing trees inside and kind of miniaturizing them plays out in your thinking in the work.
Sure. I'm going to just talk about the spaces within the spaces for a second before I go to the bonsai. So, you know, I don't know, like at the beginning I said, it's painting as a way to create a space to enter. And certainly the inside outside scenario, which is a, you know, a thematic in many artists' work, that, you know, the thinness of architecture, you know, it's a very false idea that we have any shelter, we have any safety, really, the relationship between inside and outside. But the other thing that we are in so many spaces now, it's crazy, right? We're in the Zoom space, we're in the Instagram space, we're inside our houses, we're looking out of the windows. And Instagram is really making me crazy right now for a whole bunch of different reasons. I think it's an amazing thing. I think painting, you know, in the mid 1800s, you lived in Paris and you were with the artists that you were working with, right? And you learned from them. And then maybe later, if there was some kind of large exhibition, you learned about Cubism across the pond. Now we are all together. And so this world within a world, I'm not even really sure it's only about inside and outside anymore.
Mhm.
And collating the information, like the screen, like right now, this is, you know, I am looking at all of you just like you're looking at me. And I am in all of your houses. I see all of your spaces. I'm going in and I'm going across as well. And, you know, we scroll through their phones the same way. So I think there's something about that, even though I tend to be a little bit more idealistic in terms of like nature and, you know, the transcendentalist sort of nature thing. I can't help but know that the screen, I have, you know, 4 computers, right? I like it. And I take a lot of information from that. So I think the spaces within the spaces, we can no longer, we have to include, like the screen and the internet is part of that. I don't know, do you want to say anything else? Do you want to respond to that, Julie, or?
Well, I was just thinking about the kaleidoscopic quality of what you're describing seems also very visible in the work, that there's a way in which the work kind of telescopes from expanding vision to kind of a smaller image. So there's this kaleidoscopic nature that seems to be very much what you're talking about it with regards to our Zoom space or our Instagram space as well, that there's this expansion, but also this miniaturization. So I guess I might bring it back to this notion of the miniature or the small.
Yeah. So the bonsai is like when you the reduction causes potency. So I go to this island in Casco Bay and I sit in this place that's, you know, human size, it's a house. And then I take that and I shrink it down into this smaller thing. It becomes more potent, and that as such, and the one, you know, the wonder of the miniature, you know, miniatures cause wonder in a weird way. And I don't, you know, so that is about, that's about the bonsai cottage, the fact that I can carry it around with me, that it's with me, and that it holds potency and that other people can go there. I think there's probably another point I would make about the bonsai, but I can't think of anything right now.
Yeah, I was thinking about, you know, it's sort of a craft that really is about engagement with the natural world. And it's meant to kind of distill a sense of the ongoing, which I feel is very much prevalent in your works. There's a sense of a kind of daily care and a daily attention. Again, that word cultivation comes up for me with regards to the work. So I see that happening in the work for sure.
Yeah,
So
I'll speak to that for a second. So one of the things that I'm very conscious of is the transmission of touch. And so that care, I thank you for saying that as a little prompt. The touch and the slow. I'm a really slow painter, and as I've gotten older, I embrace the slowness. I no longer rush into the studio and hurry up and try to finish it. And it's that building up and getting it right that maybe speaks to what you're talking about with bonsai plants that have been cultivated for 100 years.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love this interest. You talked about the directness of the material and then talking about touch. And, I think, of course, in the screen world, we're not getting that quality of touch. I wonder if you'd like to talk at all about kind of the surface of the painting. I mean, you've talked about how you build it up and move works around, but there is also a way in which the translucency and the opacity of the paint plays a role in the way in which your hand cultivating this very specific geometry is prevalent, because of course as humans we're as perfect as imperfect as we can be. So there's this way in which the presence of touch and the presence of your hand is very much present in the work.
So as you know, as we talk about in our MFA program and as we talk about in our BFA program, and in terms of being a scholarly pursuit, studio practice is guided by questions. One question that I always have is about the surface of the painting. I painted and varnished boats for years. So so I became really geeky about painting. I mean, for me, it's like it's a lamination process. I've painted on all different kinds of surfaces. I've painted on wood, I've painted on cotton duck, I'm now painting on linen. I painted on the wall, I painted in lots of different surfaces. Right now, one of the questions that I have is how to be looser with the work, how to be looser with the edges, how to be looser with the touch. So, and I think I've already said this, that transmission, even when you're looking at it doesn't really matter what you're looking at it, whether it's something very gestural or something very refined like a piano. If somebody is conscious enough, they're aware of how much activity went on that surface. And that's the humanity. I mean, it's the humanity that's embedded in the thing that is really what makes you cry when you look at art.
Mm-hmm.
So not only is the touch, it's like the edges for me have a lot to do with how the touch shows up. Even though, and what an imperfect surface is, and how do I get closer to something more imperfect and have it be okay? So I think about that a lot when I'm working. I also like repetitive activity.
No, that's great. So we're nearing the end of the time for the two of us. But I would love to ask you about your experience in early 2020. You did a residency, the Varda Artist Residency. And you were invited. This is an extraordinary residency that takes place on a houseboat. So I would love to hear, what role that had in your practice, how you felt, if you felt it transformed your work, or underlined certain qualities of the practice. I mean, it seems to me like it was a really extraordinary moment to step away from teaching and really go deep into the studio. And also you're translated to a new location, which had a lot of memories for you as well. So I would love to hear you talk about that.
Thank you for asking that, because so for those, I went to the Varda Artist Residency on the ferry boat Vallejo in Sausalito, and this is a site of large creative juice. Jean Varda bought, with Gordon Onslow Ford, bought the ferry boat. It's huge. First of all, it's not small, it's huge. Bought the ferry boat, I forget what year. And Alan Watts made his residency there. Maya Angelou was there. Jack Kerouac. Like it was really a hotbed of Bay Area counterculture activity. And also, I lived in Sausalito for a decade. So returning there, especially at this point in my life, my daughter's grown up. She's launched in the world. I did all the administration stuff. My daughter's launched. That residency was a moment where I could return, in a sense, to where I was before marriage and family and all the stuff that flows in at you, right, in the middle of your life. And so the thing that was the most powerful for me living in Sausalito, where I learned to sail and I lived on a small houseboat and in this community of creative people, was what it means to lead a creative life. And and painting's part of that, but really the overarching reminder of that time, beyond Alan Watts saying, leap and the net will be there, was, it's my, life question now. What is it that, that Mary Oliver says, what do I want to do with the remainder of this precious life, right? Like, I happen to be kind of boring in that I like to do the same thing every day. So, this activity, I cook, I paint, I read the mail, I go to school, right? It's all part of that. So the residency really grounded me there and connected me with my roots, which are in Maine, but also in the Bay Area. So it was really awesome time.
Yeah.
And also the just as an aside, I like to think about the future, like Harari's books, the 21 Questions of the 21st Century, and Stuart Brand's boat is right there. There's a lot of really deep thinkers in that area. So thanks for asking that question.
Yeah, it seemed like an amazing time, and really I love this notion, again, that you're grounding in a floating world, which, I think is really something you've thought about quite a bit. So I think we're ready if folks have questions and want to jump in, if Lillian's happy to take. Yeah,
that sounds good. I thought actually it would be helpful if I once more go through the images. I realized I did it pretty quickly the first time, and it might be nice to revisit them after the conversation. So I'm going to go through them once more, and then let's open it up for questions. All right. So if anybody has a question, you can type it and I'll read it aloud, or raise your hand and I will unmute you. Okay, I see a question. Amelia, let me get you unmuted. 1 second.
Hi.
Hello.
So my question is, when you were talking about your residency and that overall question, what it means to lead a creative life, I was wondering how your experience with COVID intersects with that idea or changed that idea, and how that also changed your relationship to painting, if it did.
I love you. That's my daughter. So geography has always been a really big deal for me. Where I go, like I douse geography. I also, somewhere in my head, when I was much younger, got the idea that I always wanted to live near or on the water. So the parameters were set at a certain point. Living in Sausalito, it was really incredible. Like, I could talk hours about that. I saw people defining what they wanted their life to be, within a context of incredible convention, right? Because Sausalito is a conventional location with people working in the financial district or whatever. So I saw that, and it has never left me. My life right now with COVID is not that different than it would be with COVID. When I came back before COVID, before we had to go to quarantine, when I came back from Sausalito, I said to my husband, let's go rent a house on Peaks Island for the winter next year, separate from COVID. So for me, doing this, I knew it would put me in a situation where I had to go on a boat and figure out a bunch of things and keep me a little bit uncomfortable. So this idea of leading a creative life really hasn't changed. And in fact, in many ways, the solitude of this time has supported me. Having said that, I would rather not have a pandemic going on. And I would probably be traveling somewhere or doing something else to kind of follow my nose, to answer a question, to see something that I wanted to see. I don't know if that answers your question, honey, but you can ask me again later.
Thank you, Gail. We have a question from Melissa Sweet, and then I'm going to go with Lynn. So Melissa asks, does the horizon line where the ocean meets the sky feel constant, or do you have a quest to see horizon lines in far-flung places?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think it's a constant. One of the places as a young kid, I believe everybody's artwork comes out of their experience, and comes out of their experience from youth and what you saw and where you were. And one of the things, the horizon line as a young kid, the ocean horizon line was a comfort to me. I think I searched for that. I think I search for those spaces, and I paint them when I don't see them. So yeah, I think it's a constant.
Mm-hmm. Lynn, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Gail. So the whole idea of sort of edges that's in your work, I mean, it's so much in the actual imagery itself and all the detailing, but thinking about the edge between the interior and the exterior. And it's interesting to see it in terms of habited space, because I more think of it as open, outside, natural space. But one of the things that is interesting to me about the interiors is they're very inviting, but there's almost like there's no place for people in them. So they're so pristine in a way. I mean, it's I don't know if that's anything that you can say anything to. I mean, they really invite me in, but it almost looks like I might make a mess while I'm in there or something. And
cannot have that. I had somebody say, so a number of things. I had somebody say to me, I think of these spaces as very inviting and places that I want to go into. Like they're my spaces, right? They're the way I want the world to look, right? I paint the world like I want it to be. For other people, like you say, you feel like you're going to make a mess. I had somebody say to me that the silence was deafening. So I think it depends where you're coming from, right? So yeah, I mean, well-ordered spaces don't sit right with lots of people, right? That's not their spaces. The other thing that I want to ask about is the edges. I want to say something about his edges. So edges, like painters are relentlessly talking about edges. Like it's one of those esoteric painting conversations that, I mean, I'm sure other artists do the same, right? But it is one of those conversations that, you know, the nod of like, oh, check out that edge. One of the things in terms of the world within the painting, not necessarily between inside and outside. I mean, I also think of the edge of when you sail, where you can see wind up ahead of you. And you know you're going to get a gust, you're going to get like a puff card, right? There's lots of different ways to talk about edges. One of the things that interests me most in painting is that light is about light and light's relationship to edges. The way we see the world is through edges, right? When it's black, when it's pitch black, you can't see edges. You have no sense of your body within a space. But as soon as light comes up, you're able to negotiate scale and location. So there's a lot of layers to the word edges for me, not only the physical and the interior, but also related to the illumination within the painting. So I don't know, next time you come over, I'll try to scatter some mess around or something.
Thank you, Gail. We have so many great questions coming in, and I'm sorry if we won't be able to get to all of them. But Sarah Jacobs asks, many of your motifs remind me of Fraktur Dutch folk art. Have you been at all influenced by any folk arts?
Sure, absolutely. The flatness. I mean, Grandma Moses, I'm a fan. Like I feel like I am Grandma Moses sometimes. But where I grew up with the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hartford, and the early American, really it's the early American portraiture that was the beginning of that.
Got it. Honor Mac has a question. Can you tell us more about the birds that often occupy the spaces that you build, and are they connected to the boats?
Hi, Honor. I guess the bird is as close to a figure as I can get. Are they related to the boats? Not really. It's more about living on land, just like the gardens are, which aren't in these spaces so much. I also, there's this, I now think of myself as an observational painter, and there's this tree by my entranceway to my house that there's a lot of birds in that tree. And part of my inclination with the birds and also with the opticality of the color is to create that fluttering thing that happens when there's a lot of birds in a space. So that's my answer for that at the moment. I think I'll think more about that later.
Sounds good. Thank you. Jessica Foley, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Gail. It's so good to hear your voice and to see your face. You mentioned seeking more looseness in your work, and that really surprised me because it seems like the more details are added, the sort of tighter things are. And I was thinking that couldn't be about speed, and it must not be about being more gestural, because neither of those like are your style. So like what is your yardstick for looseness, and like, why are you searching for that?
I have two answers, but I have to just tell everybody that Jessica Foley was an MFA student at Mecca, and we saw Luke Toymans in Venice, and she was one of the few people to ask a question in this very, very incredible space. So I feel honored you're asking me a question. So looseness, there's two parts of that. One is my body is not going to be able to keep working the way I work now. And so I don't want to use tape anymore. Like, it's a really pragmatic answer. Like, I want to be able to paint without using tape. I also want to be able to have the edges of color shapes touch each other and overlap more or something. Like, it's a painting question. And the other answer to that is I saw a de Kooning retrospective several years ago, many years ago, I guess, at the Met. And what you notice when I noticed was kind of like one's life, it gets very filled up and then it kind of possibly clears out. And so for me, the clearing out would be that I would allow the brush mark to behave in a different way.
Thank you. We might have time for one, maybe two more questions. So this is from Anne Buckwalter. Hi, Gail, and congrats. I'm wondering how you are thinking about time or timelessness in these paintings. With the exception of a laptop sitting on a table, there is a distinct lack of modern objects in the work that feels intentional, phones and cords and such, things you might typically see in domestic spaces. When are these paintings happening?
So a few ways to talk about time. They're happening now, and they're happening forever. And this idea that I'm connected in time with early civilization through the act of painting is part of the time that one sees in the painting, but it's also very particular to, I mean, landscapes, they kind of look the same, other than the geology, right? They look the same. And I guess I'm not doing a great job answering this. It's suspended time. I guess I'll leave it at that to let maybe another question in. I'm glad you're here, though.
Sounds good. This one is from Ashera Cinnamon. What do you love about painting on linen with all your choices?
Well, the texture of the linen and also the conceptual part of it, right? It's acrylic on linen. I get a little tweaky when I write that on my materials because I feel uncomfortable about writing that, but I also feel like it's a conceptual, like it is acrylic on linen. That, you know, maybe that goes to Anne's question about time, right? That's really where the time is. Like, it's acrylic on linen. So I just like, I have my canvases made in Lincolnville, and I like the way it's primed. I like the bumpiness. I like the fact, I just like the surface.
Got it. Thank you. Let's see. I guess the last question. Jolene asks, do you rearrange your house as much as you rearrange your paintings?
No, I don't. Actually, it stays pretty much the same. Having said that, I do mess with the vignettes a little bit around. I'm not as obsessed with rearranging my house as my dearest friend Karen Ogg is.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, that brings us to 3 o'clock, and I wish I could have accepted everybody's questions, but feel free to email us with more questions and I can relay them on to Gail. Her show will remain on view in our viewing room through February 26th, and all the paintings that we looked at today are on the website, so you can get closer looks at them there. Thank you, everybody, so much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Bye.